Today I want to share with you the best, most delicious way to prepare sardines. Now, if you already eat sardines and you like them, great. This recipe is going to give you a different way to prepare them for a change of pace. Now, on the other hand, if you say, oh, Mary, I don't really like sardines, please trust me and try this recipe. I have a feeling that you're going to come back to me and you're going to go, wow, Mary, I really like sardines prepared like this, because that's the response I've had with anyone I've shared this recipe with. Now, you don't have to write anything down. Be sure to check the description underneath this video, where I'll have a link to the blog post and the downloadable or printable recipe, and you'll have all the information that you need. But I've got some surprises in store for you today. If you find that you want just a change of pace in general, you want tinned fish or canned fish, as we call it here in the US, but our friends across the pond, our sweet friends, call it tinned fish. If you want some change of pace from just eating sardines, but you want fish that's equally nutritious and brings omega-3s to the table, which are good for the brain and good for the heart, and also have a lot of the similar vitamins and minerals of sardines, I've got you covered. We're going to talk about mackerel, we're going to talk about herring, kippers specifically, which is smoked herring. These are all wonderful options and they're budget friendly. And we're going to talk about other fish as well. And I've got all of this prepared for you to watch in videos, and all of them come with printable recipes. So you've got a full, in essence, Fish Friday marathon. I like to call it Fish Friday because I grew up, when I was growing up, we always ate fish on Friday. And as we go into the Lenten season, if you follow that tradition, it's nice to have some good fish recipes under your belt, so to speak, to serve on Fridays. And also, most importantly, ones that are budget friendly. And that's the nice thing about canned or tinned fish. It's very budget friendly. Alrighty, let's get started. Hi, sweet friends. If you're new here, I'm Mary from marysnest.com, and author of the Modern Pioneer Cookbook and the Modern Pioneer Pantry, and I'd like to welcome you to my kitchen. Now, the first recipe that we're going to make together is the sardines recipe. And then after that, we're going to make the kippers or kipper snacks recipe. Now, as I said, check the description below, head over to my website, marysnest.com. You can print out the recipes, so you'll have everything there for you. Also, if you have my first cookbook, the Modern Pioneer Cookbook, in that I also have recipes for using sardines and kippers, and they're all very similar. What's over on my website and what's in my cookbook is very similar, so both will work. Now, I've got a selection of sardines here, with so many folks getting interested in eating sardines, for the protein, whether it's a keto diet, a paleo diet, a low-carb diet, Mediterranean diet, whatever diet that you follow, everyone is always looking for increasing their protein. And so sardines there's a huge selection these days at the grocery store, and there's various price points. This is a brand that's just sold by our local H-E-B. As you know, I live in Central Texas, and they also have a chain of stores called Central Market, and they have products under that brand name. And so today we've got spicy sardines here, which these are in extra virgin olive oil, and these are with lemon. And various other brands will have similar options. For the recipe that we're going to make, you can use whatever type of sardines that you like. And none of this is sponsored. These are all the various types of canned fish my husband Ted and I eat. And over here, this one we have a lot. This is the King Oscar brand. This is from our local grocery store, H-E-B. I think it's a nationwide brand. You should be able to find that anywhere. I've also got here kind of something that's sort of new on the market, at least new to me, is the Fishwife brand, and these are ones with hot pepper. My husband likes spicy things. I like tangy things with lemon. And here we've got the sardines preserved with lemon. Now, I will say about the Fishwife brand, the packaging is adorable. These are a little more pricey than most of the other sardines I usually buy, but the folks over at Fishwife are so nice that they've offered a discount to my sweet friends. So if you decide you want to buy these, be sure to check the description below where I'll have a link that you can get a discount on their products. I would say that these can be very nice if maybe you're doing a dinner party and you want to get, and maybe the way you're serving the sardines are giving everybody their individual can or something like that. These could be very cute. And then over here, I have the Bar Harbor brand. Now, these are skinless, boneless smoked sardine fillets. Very tasty. However, I will say that I generally like to get the sardines that have both the skin and the bones intact. You can eat the bones of sardines. I just want to share that with you in case you weren't aware of that. They're very easy to digest, and they're very high in calcium. So that's an added benefit, and the skin also provides different nutrients as well. So that's kind of how I like to eat them. But if you're new to sardines and you're just kind of getting started, sometimes the skinless, boneless ones can be a good place to start. And when they have that little bit of smoky flavor, if you like that, maybe you've tried Kippers or Kipper snacks, which is smoked herring, and you like that. Starting with sardines like this can be a very good place to get started. Alrighty, well, let's go ahead and let's make what I consider the best, most delicious sardines recipe out there. So you bought a can of sardines. Now what? Well, I'm going to share a recipe with you today that is absolutely delicious and very easy to prepare, and I think will be liked by even those who think they don't like sardines. If you're in the process of making the transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, you may be stocking your pantry with foods that are very new to you. Now, some of those foods, although new to your pantry, may be a little more familiar to you, such as dried beans. And once you soak and cook dried beans, it's a very familiar food. It's just beans. But stocking canned fish in your pantry may be another matter. Now, you may be used to having a couple of cans of tuna fish in your pantry, but if you can't find them and you look to other canned fish, you're going to find sardines and kippers and anchovies on your grocery store shelves. But if you've never used them, what do you do with them? And also, just in general, as you are making that transition from a processed foods kitchen to a more traditional foods kitchen, you're wanting to incorporate a variety of canned fish into your diet. Fish like sardines and kippers and anchovies are small fish, and they're generally wild caught, and they're often very low in mercury, something that can be very concerning to many. Plus, these smaller canned fish are very high in omega-3s, which we hear from scientists are very good for our bodies on so many levels, good for our heart and our blood, among other things. And sardines are especially high in vitamin D, which we also hear from scientists is very important and has been found through various studies to be linked to cancer prevention and bone health. Now, I grew up eating sardines on a regular basis, and they were often served by my mom on rye bread with pickled red onions and then a couple of sardines, and it was delicious. But I definitely understand that that's not for everybody. And sometimes when you are introducing these new foods to yourself, your family, and friends, you have to find ways to incorporate them with a lot of other flavors to make them palatable. And then over time, one's palate finds that they're actually craving them. Now, the recipe I'm sharing today is not my own. I really have to give credit to Rebecca Katz, and she has a wonderful line of cookbooks. And this particular recipe she calls Good Mood Sardines, because I gather omega-3s are linked to giving us a good mood. And this particular recipe is from her book, The Longevity Kitchen, and I'll be sure to put a link to that below. But she has a whole library of wonderful cookbooks, and they're all related to foods that are very good for your health. And I especially like this book that I mentioned, The Longevity Kitchen, and I like the way her subtitle reads, Satisfying Big Flavor Recipes Featuring the Top 16 Age-Busting Power Foods. Well, we've got one of them here today. Now I've changed this recipe just a little bit because I'm using what I can find that's in season, but I will go over her exact recipe so that if you are watching this at a particular season when certain herbs are in season, you can use those as well. Now to get started, what you're going to need is 1 can of sardines, and they can be packed in olive oil or water. Either is fine. And if all you can find are the sardines that are described as like Mediterranean, that usually may have a little tomato sauce or some other seasonings in them, that's fine too. Now I like to buy the cans of sardines that are the whole little sardines with the skin and the bone intact. The skin and the bones are very nutritious, but the bones are edible, so you don't need to worry. If you've ever had canned salmon, which comes with the skin and the bones in it as well, the bones just crumble right up. But if that at all concerns you, you can certainly look for sardines that are boneless and skinless. Next, you're going to need an onion, and I've got a red onion here. You can use a white onion or a yellow onion. I've made it with all types of onions. You can even use scallions or green onions. Any type of onion will work. Next, you're going to want a lemon, and we're going to use both the juice and the zest. So if you've got an organic lemon, great. If not, don't worry. Normally, if I'm going to be using the zest on a lemon that's not organic, I'll just give it a good little washing with a little baking soda and vinegar, and then give it a good rinse. And then you want a nice big handful of fresh Italian flat leaf parsley. Now, depending what time of year you're making this, you could also add in some fresh basil, you could add in some fresh mint. You basically make this your own. Add in whatever fresh herbs you like. And if you don't have any fresh herbs on hand, don't worry. You can substitute using some dry herbs. And I will be sure to have the printable recipe. I'll put a link in the description below, right underneath this video, that'll take you over to my website, which is also the same name, Mary's Nest. And you'll be able to print out the recipe there or read it online, whatever you like to do. And I'll talk about the amounts of dried herbs that you would need. Next, you're going to want a teaspoon of mustard. This is a Dijon mustard. It's got a nice little spice to it, but again, use whatever you have, whatever you like. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of salt. I've got about 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt here. And I think that it does need a little salt, but if you're on salt-restricted diet and you want to leave it out, by all means leave it out, and then when you go to taste it, you can see if you think it needs a little salt, or even if you need to add a little more than the 1/8 if you are going to be adding that in. Now I just want to mention one thing. If you are using sardines that are packed in water, it might be helpful to add a little extra olive oil, but it's completely optional. Now once you get your can of sardines open, you just want to go ahead and start dumping them into a bowl. And you'll see, as I mentioned, these have the skin on them and they're still intact. We have the whole sardine here, and I'll overlay a picture so that you can see that. And I'm going to go ahead and just add in my olive oil. I'm not going to drain any of it off. These are packed in beautiful extra virgin olive oil, so we don't want to waste any of that. And I think you'll be surprised when you open them, if you've never worked with sardines before. They actually smell quite pleasant, very much of the sea. Now all you want to do is get in your bowl and just start breaking these up. So you're just going to break them up just until they're in little chunks. It's not an exact science. You don't need to be exact. Just what you think looks like, kind of like a little mash. Next, you want to peel your onion and start to chop it up. And you really want to chop it fine, kind of a nice, almost a mince. Now the original recipe calls for only 2 tablespoons of chopped onion. But I'm one of those people who, when I do something with onions or a lemon or whatever the case may be, I never use just part of it. I tend to always just use the whole thing, and I find it's usually fine. So what I do in the case of this recipe is try to find a small onion. And that's what I found with this red onion. It was on the small side. Now don't throw away the skins or the blossom, anything that you cut off that you don't use for this recipe. Put these in a bag, stick them in your fridge or in your freezer, and then use them when you make your bone broth or your vegetable broth. Alrighty, well now I'm going to go ahead and add in my onion. I love red onion. I love any kind of onion. As a matter of fact, my parents tell me when I was a little kid, I used to eat the onions like an apple. So I've actually got about 4 tablespoons as opposed to the original 2 with the original recipe. But I love it. So if you're a real onion lover, by all means, you can double up like I have. Next, you're going to want to take your lemon and use a zester and just get all of that lemon zest down in there. If you notice, it's quite dark behind me and it's actually only mid-afternoon, but we're having a major thunderstorm here in Central Texas. So if you hear thunder in the background, you'll know what's going on. Now I'm just going to work the seeds out of my lemon, and then we're going to juice the whole lemon in with the sardines. And in goes all this wonderful lemon juice. Well, I've got the lemon juice in there, and I want to mention now, don't throw these out either. Save them in your fridge or your freezer, and when you go to make your bone broth and you need something acidic to acidulate the water that you're soaking your bones in to help start pulling out the gelatin, these can work great. You can just throw them in as is. Now I'm just going to start chopping up this flat leaf Italian parsley, and I like to chop it nice and fine. Now Rebecca's original recipe calls for a variety of herbs. She's got not only the flat leaf Italian parsley, but she also has a little bit of fresh basil and a little bit of fresh mint. I'm not a fan. I've made it many ways with those herbs as well as others, but I have found that the mint can almost be a little overpowering. It may just be the mint from my garden that's a little overpowering. I have peppermint. But I really like it just with the Italian flat leaf parsley, and the basil is very nice too. But basil's not in season right now. However, if you want to put in a little dried basil, you can certainly do that. But what I recommend for a little tip is to put just a little bit of hot water over your dried basil and let it sit for a little bit. It doesn't exactly reconstitute, but it softens it a bit, and I find it works better in this recipe. Whatever fresh herbs you decide to use, you're looking for about 6 teaspoons worth of fresh herbs. Now, if you were doing dry herbs, you'd want to cut that in half or even a little less than half. But again, I feel with this sort of recipe, it's not an exact science. So really put in as many or as little fresh herbs or dried herbs for that matter as you like. Well, we'll get in the last of our parsley here and we'll mix this all up and give it a taste. Next, we're going to go ahead and add in that 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. But as I said, after we taste it, sometimes the sardines can be a little salty. So we'll just put that 1/8 of a teaspoon and then our 1 teaspoon of the Dijon mustard. And we'll taste it and we'll see if it needs some more salt. And now all we do is just give this a gentle mix up. That's it. It couldn't be easier. Now once you get this all mixed up, you can put it in a little serving bowl and serve it with crackers. It's lovely that way. You could also use this to top a salad. That would be very nice as well. Now, you can eat this right away as is, and the onions will still have a little bit of a crunch to them, or you can let this marinate for a couple of hours or even overnight in your refrigerator. And with the lemon juice, it'll cause a little bit of a pickling of the onions and it'll soften them. Not only their texture, but to a certain extent their flavor. But red onions are nice for this if onions are not something that you're used to, because they always seem to have a nice, at least for me, a little bit of a milder flavor than some of your other onions. But I think like the sweet yellow Vidalia would probably be lovely too. And green onions I think are always great in this. Well, I'm just going to give this a taste right off my spoon, not on a cracker or anything, and I'll tell you how it is. That is really delicious. I know those of you who may not be used to sardines are saying, oh, I don't know. Trust me, try this. I think you're going to really like it. So I'm so looking forward to hearing from you what you think of this recipe after you make it. So be sure to come back to this video and leave me a comment or drop me an email. I love hearing that people are loving sardines because they're just so good for you. As I mentioned earlier, they're high in omega-3 fatty acids. They're also high in vitamin D. That's often something we don't get enough of, at least here in the United States. And maybe our friends across the pond feel the same way. When you have cloudy, rainy weather, when you don't have a lot of sun or you use a lot of sunscreen, we don't absorb a lot of vitamin D. And so getting it from oily fish like sardines is excellent. Also, small fish like sardines and everything we're going to talk about today are very low in mercury, which is good news. We don't need to worry so much about that. And then, like I mentioned earlier, if you go ahead and enjoy sardines with the bones in them, you're getting a nice calcium boost as well. Alrighty, now for our Fish Friday marathon, let's take a minute and talk about kippers or kipper snacks. And I'm going to show you a great way to prepare these that's so easy. This is the type of meal when you've just had a long week and you get home on Friday and you want to throw something together that is very simple but really tasty. This is your go-to kipper snacks. And this, here I've got the King Oscar, the same as the sardines people, wild caught, you know, very affordable, very budget friendly. These are a little more expensive. I think these were maybe about $1 more a can. But these are also the same thing. They're both kippers, it's smoked herring. And you can't go wrong. And what I'm going to show you in this recipe, it's so easy to prepare. It's even kind of funny calling it a recipe, but it's the kippers, some rice, some soy sauce. You can add some veggies. You could add a little kimchi, whatever you like. It's very, very flexible, and it's fast, and it's easy. And so, also too, I wanted to mention that the nice thing about kippers, see, this is why I like, sardines are great, and you want to have sardines in your diet. But variety is very important because every type of canned fish brings a little something different to the table in terms of nutrition. And the nice thing about kippers is they are rich in selenium. And many canned fish options are rich in selenium, just maybe at varying degrees. But the nice thing about eating canned fish that is rich in selenium, mackerel is also another one, which we'll talk about in a bit. But the nice thing is selenium is very difficult today to get into our diets. You might get it from Brazil nuts or canned fish, but often you don't hear every day people eating Brazil nuts. They're less common. And a lot of people will sometimes kind of, not so much that they're turning their nose up to canned fish, but most people are so used to maybe just tuna fish that they don't explore and try things like kippers. And again, low in mercury, high in omega-3s, and the nice thing about kippers, especially if you're new to eating canned fish, is these are often boneless and skinless. So you're not necessarily getting the calcium from the bones, but you are getting the selenium and the omega-3s and other vitamins and minerals as well. And I'll go into a lot more detail about all of this for you on the blog post. But what's important is try these, experiment, see what you like, and try to always be adding a variety of canned fish into your diet so that you get a variety of nutrients. Alrighty, so now let's go and prepare a wonderful meal using kippers or kipper snacks. Wondering what to do with all those kippers you stocked up on? Well, I've got an easy and delicious canned herring recipe for you that you're gonna love. Now, I know many of you have shared with me that you really enjoy when I share the reasons why we want to eat kippers or any nutrient-dense food for that matter. But what I'm going to do first is make the recipe, and then I'll save the nutritional information for the end for those of you who like the recipe first. Now, in the beginning, you may have noticed that I use the term kippers and herring because that's what kippers are. Kippers are smoked herring. Now, as we go over the ingredients for this dish, I want to mention that I know some of you have shared with me that you don't like the flavor of smoked fish or meats or poultry, so on and so forth. And if that's the case, you can go ahead and use mackerel in this recipe. And the mackerel that I'm able to find at my grocery store already has a little flavoring in it, which is nice. This is jalapeno, we've got lemon, and this one is sweet red bell peppers and black olives. You might have, this is a common brand, you might have this in your store as well, but know that you can use either the kippers, the smoked herring, or the mackerel for this recipe. Now, I'm going to use 2 cans of Kippers to make this because I allow 1 can per person. And this is going to be for my husband and for me. Now, if you want to make this for 4, 6, whatever amount you want to make, you will just add additional cans of Kippers or mackerel. And the cans of Kippers that I have here are approximately 3.5 ounces. And I think for the most part, whatever brand you find at your grocery store is going to be about 3.5 ounces. This is a different brand. I've got here the Ocean Prince, I've got here King Oscar, and this is also about 3.5 ounces. So I think they're pretty much all the same. And a 3.5 ounce can per person is perfect. But certainly you can add 2 cans per person if you want for a more hearty meal. The only other ingredients that you're going to need is some rice, and I've got this cooking right here in my rice cooker, and I have made this with chicken bone broth, butter, and sea salt. So hopefully through those 3 extra ingredients, as opposed to just going with water, I'm adding a lot of nutrition. The other ingredients that you're going to need is a bunch of parsley. I've got the flat leaf Italian parsley here. And you're going to want a lemon, and we're going to use the whole lemon. And the other thing that you're going to want is something in the onion family. I have a shallot here. You could also use green onions if you want. You could use red onions, white onions, whatever you have. But shallots and red onions, something like that, just give a nice pop of color. But any type of onion flavoring will be perfect. And the only other ingredient that you're going to need is some olive oil. And I'm using an extra virgin olive oil, and yes, it's from a Texas olive ranch. I think it's very cute how in Texas they don't say olive grove, they say olive ranch. Seems very appropriate to Texas. And the only other ingredients that you might need are a little bit of salt and pepper, although Kippers and mackerel, they tend to have some nice salting in them already when they come out of the can. But if you want additional salt and pepper, you can certainly add it to taste. For now, we're just going to set the Kippers aside, and we're going to go ahead and make the topping. How this dish shapes up is that you're going to put your rice in a bowl, you're going to put your Kippers on top, and I'll show you how you can put the Kippers right from the can, or if you want to warm them, either way is fine. And then you're going to top this with a nice mixture that's something somewhere between a gremolata and a chimichurri. And if those terms are new to you, all they really are flavor boosters. They usually involve parsley or cilantro, garlic, onions, lemon, olive oil, things like that. The gremolata tends to be a little drier without the olive oil, and the chimichurri tends to have a little bit more of a sauce feel to it. So we're going to make this mixture, this flavor booster, that's a wonderful complement to Kippers or mackerel. Both of those canned fishes are very rich foods. They're very rich nutritionally, which we'll talk about later, but they're also very rich in their mouthfeel. And so having something that sort of lightens it and brightens it, that has some parsley, some lemon, a little olive oil, really helps sort of just boost, as I said, they're flavor boosters, these type of toppings. And it helps bring all the best flavors together and create something that's exceptionally tasty. And that's what makes these flavor boosters so helpful, especially if you're trying Kippers for the first time, or if you think maybe in the past you didn't really like Kippers. Making something with a flavor booster can often completely change the profile of the dish, and suddenly you find, wow, I really like this, just as you have with the sardine recipe. Well, I've washed my parsley here, and I just have 1 bunch. Now this is going to make more of a flavor booster, more of a gremolata chimichurri mixture than what 2 people would need. But the nice thing about this will last about a week in your fridge. And you top this onto anything, chicken, fish, anything savory, and maybe a nice piece of grilled steak, and it's just delicious. And so you definitely will find that you're going to use this up. If all you're serving today are 2 people, 4 people, you may find you use the whole bunch. But know that it does store for about a week in your fridge. Well, as I said, this is washed. I dried it off with my tea towel. And even if there's a little water on it, don't worry, it's fine. Just make sure it's nice and clean and there's no grittiness to it. Sometimes you can find that to be the case with these fresh leaf parsleys. Now, What I want to mention is we're going to do our best to cut off as much of the greenery as we can. And it's okay to also include the tender stems. We're not going to add in these tough lower stems, but don't throw these out. The next time you make bone broth, tie these with a kitchen twine and dip them in at the last 10 minutes of the simmer, as the last 10 minutes as the bone broth simmers. And that'll add a nice little bit of flavor. Alrighty, so I'm just going to start doing like this. We're just going to get off as much as we can. Now the reason that I'm cutting the leaves off of like this as opposed to just chopping it straight away is that these stems, even above the rubber band, are quite thick. And so we really want to avoid those in the mixture that we're making, in the flavor booster that we're making. You can go ahead and just hand remove some extra leaves if you see some that look exceptionally nice. And as you're doing this process of getting the leaves off, if you come across a very thick stem like this, just pull it out and set it aside. Now what we're going to do is go ahead and chop this fairly as finely as we can. But you want to just do this with your kitchen knife. You don't want to make a puree of it in a blender or in a food processor or even a mini chop, nothing like that. You want it to be finely chopped but roughly chopped. And I'll show you exactly what I mean because you want it to have some texture to it. So just keep rocking your knife back and forth. And if you come across every once in a while amongst a rather thick stem, you can just go and pull that out. And just keep rocking your knife back and forth until you get a small chop, but yet as you see we're just doing it with our knife. It's just nothing fancy, nothing well calculated. It's just going to be a rough chop but relatively fine. I'll put some up on the knife here. You can see the texture that we're looking for. This is perfect. Now we'll go ahead and get all of our parsley into a bowl. Now, you may be wondering, why doesn't Mary have some garlic in this? And you can certainly add it. I do recommend that you just make it like this the first time and see how you like it. I find that sometimes the raw garlic, because this is going to be a raw sauce, the raw garlic can almost be a little overpowering and kind of steal the day, so to speak, from all of the other ingredients, and especially the Kippers. I feel it's just a little too much of a contrast. But make it this way the first time, and then next time if you want, you can certainly start with adding maybe just 1 clove of chopped raw garlic. Now I've washed and dried my lemon, and what I'm going to do is take a microplane grater, and yeah, any fine grater you have like this will work great, and we're going to zest the lemon, because we want to get all the essential oils to be released into our sauce from the lemon zest. And this is always one of my favorite jobs. The aroma is amazing. And just do the best you can to get off as much of the zest you can. We're going to leave the pith behind. That's the white part. That's why if you're wondering why I keep checking, I want to make sure that I'm just getting the zest and not the pith. Now that we've zested our lemon, we're going to go ahead and juice it right into our bowl. I'm just going to put a strainer over the bowl to catch the seeds, and I'm just going to use a little hand reamer here to start getting all of this wonderful juice out of the lemon, but at the same time, the strainer will catch the seeds. Now, after you juice these lemon halves, don't throw these away. I kind of think of these as the pith shells, for lack of a better word. Save these for when you make various natural type remedies. Recently I showed you how to make the lemon, ginger, turmeric ice cubes. Saving these and using these in that recipe will be perfect. So definitely go ahead and save these. Save them in a scrap bag. You can pop them in the freezer. It doesn't matter because in that recipe for making the ice cubes, you're actually cooking the recipe first before you freeze it. Now what I'm going to do is actually pick the seeds out of this strainer and just put them to the side because I want to add all of this pulp, seed-free, into our bowl. Alrighty, so far we've got the parsley, the lemon zest, the lemon juice, and the lemon pulp in our bowl. Now we're going to go ahead and mince our shallot. If you're using a red onion, just find a very small one or maybe just half a one. The reason I use shallot in this recipe is you don't want to overpower it with a strong onion flavor. And I always hate when I just have to use like half or a quarter of something, and especially when it's onions, because they tend to be rather odorous in the refrigerator once they're cut. But certainly a little small red onion will work fine. If you can't find one, then yes, you just have to use a little piece of it. That's why I kind of like these green onions, because you can just use maybe one or two of them and you'll be all set. Also too, if you have a small white onion or a small yellow onion, that'll work too. Now I'm just going to remove this outer skin of the shallot. Don't throw this out. Add this to your vegetable scrap bag where you keep like your carrot peelings and celery, bottoms, the bottom of the celery, the root of the celery, other onion skins. Put your shallot skins in your scrap bag along with any other little scraps that we have left over from the shallot. Those are perfect for going into your bone broth. Now I'm going to go ahead and mince this. You want this to be a very fine cut, because you don't want people getting, like big chunks of shallot or onions, whatever you're using, in their mouth. You want all the flavors to meld together beautifully. Now, once you go ahead and slice through your onion and then you chop it, what you want to do is take your knife and you want to run over the onion just like you did with the parsley, just rocking the knife back and forth. This just helps to give everything an extra little bit of mince, just in case your slices weren't as small as you would like them, or your chop, so to speak, of the onion what didn't come as small as you'd like. Going over it with the knife like this gets everything nicely minced. Alrighty, once you've got your shallot into a nice mince, you're just going to go and put this right into your bowl. The next thing we're going to do is just mix everything up that's in our bowl to get it all well incorporated and get the shallot nicely distributed throughout the parsley. And what I want to say is you can use a whisk or a spatula to do this, but I actually find just using a fork works really well, because you'll see what the next step is. And I think that just having a fork does the job. Next, we're going to add in our olive oil. Now, how much olive oil you add really is going to depend on what type of consistency you want with your final product, your final flavor booster. I like to be a little generous with the olive oil, but you can start with a 1/4 cup and then work up to a 1/2 cup. But I would recommend that if this is the first time that you're making something like this, just start with a 1/4 cup. So all I'm going to do is start pouring in my olive oil. I'm not measuring, I'm really just using my eyes to determine the consistency that I like. But as I said, if you do like measurements, just start drizzling in about a 1/4 cup. And as you drizzle, just mix it in nicely with your parsley mixture. Alrighty, well, I think I've got this to the consistency that I like. This is going to be perfect for topping on the kippers. So now we're going to go ahead and set this aside and we'll prepare the kippers. Now, how you want to plate this up is just by putting some rice in a bowl. And as I shared with you earlier, I made this rice. It's being kept warm in my rice cooker. And it's a basmati, but I've made it with butter, salt, and chicken bone broth. So hopefully it contains a lot of good nutrients. Now, I store these kippers in my pantry, so they're room temperature, and my husband and I enjoy them as is. But if you want to warm these, you really don't need to get all fancy with a skillet and all of that. You can just take these cans, put them in a bowl in which you've got hot water, and let them sit in there for about 5 minutes, and when you open the can, the kippers will be nice and warm. What's also nice about most canned kippers is that they do come with these pull tops. Now, once you open the can of kippers, you'll notice that there is some liquid in there. I personally find it very tasty, and I like to go ahead and pour it over my rice, but you can certainly leave it behind in the can, whatever you want. The next thing that I do is just start to take the kippers out of the can, just sort of flaking them as I go, and topping them on the rice. Now you're going to go ahead and take a little bit of your flavor booster here and just go ahead and top this right on. Don't worry if it's not artistic looking. Just go ahead and put as much or as little as you'd like. And then I recommend that you do taste it. And if you find you feel it needs salt and pepper, go ahead at that point and add it. And now this is ready to eat as is. As I mentioned earlier, you can add a little salt and pepper if you want. If you like another punch of onion flavor, you can add some sliced green onions on top. That would be very delicious. Or you could even use an extra squeeze of lemon juice. What I recommend is make it like this, taste it, and then see what additions you'd like to add. Now we'll go ahead and taste this in a sec. But as I mentioned earlier, I want to share with you why it's important to eat foods like kippers, as well as mackerel and sardines and anchovies, all these small, nutrient-dense fish. And that brings us to a discussion about what do we mean when we say nutrient-dense foods. The term today is used very broadly, and that's okay. But nutrient-dense has a very specific meaning. And if you're looking for whatever reason in terms of health to supplement your diet with nutrient-dense foods, it's important to know what that means. Often vegetables like kale, who's a real star, will often be referred to as nutrient-dense. But technically, it's not nutrient-dense, it's nutrient-rich. It's rich in nutrients, it's rich in certain vitamins and minerals. But you have to eat a lot of kale. Kale, let's say per square inch, does contain vitamins and minerals, but you have to eat a lot of kale to get a good boost of vitamins and minerals. If you just ate 1 square inch of kale, you wouldn't be getting a lot of vitamins and minerals. So in that sense, kale is not a dense food. It's rich in vitamins and minerals. You just need to eat a lot of it. Nutrient-dense foods, on the other hand, or the word specifically nutrient-dense, means that there are a lot of vitamins and minerals, a lot of nutrients within a very small amount of that particular food. So if you eat a square inch, in this case, of kippers versus a square inch of kale, you're getting a lot more nutrients from the kippers. Other nutrient-dense foods are animal organs, like liver. A square inch of liver is very nutrient-dense. It's loaded with vitamins and minerals and all kinds of important, good, healthy fats. So for a traditional foods diet, it is important, of course, that we eat nutrient-rich foods like fruits and vegetables. But we also want to make sure that we have sufficient nutrient-dense foods, true nutrient-dense foods. And they actually work hand in hand, synergistically together, because in order to really absorb the vitamins and minerals and the other nutrients that are in antioxidants, so on and so forth, that are in fruits and vegetables, we need the fats that are in the nutrient-dense foods to help us absorb those vitamins and minerals that are in the nutrient-rich foods. So I hope this explanation helps you on your traditional foods journey of seeing the importance of including both nutrient-rich and nutrient-dense foods in your entire traditional foods diet. And something that's wonderful about kippers is they are a nutrient-dense food and they're very rich in omega-3s. And if we've heard a lot about omega-3s, it's often related to the fact that they're very good for our health. You often hear of the benefits of eating salmon because it's very rich in omega-3s. But salmon sometimes can be costly, whereas these canned fishes, these smaller canned fishes, are usually extremely affordable. So they're a wonderful source of omega-3. And why do we want to make sure we have the omega-3 in our diet? Well, it's very good for our hearts and it's very good for our brains. So including a variety of canned fish, or tinned fish, as some of you may know it, in our diets is so beneficial to us, and at the same time it's easy on our pocketbook. So we're eating wonderfully nutritious, nutrient-dense foods, and we're not having to pay a lot of money for them as we might be if we were buying, say, fresh salmon, which is often reserved for a special occasion. And this makes just the perfect traditional foods meal because it provides you with nutrient-rich foods as well as nutrient-dense foods. You have the rice, which has been cooked with bone broth, butter, and salt, and the salt providing some minerals, the butter providing a wonderfully good fat, and the bone broth providing a rich source of gelatin, which is very soothing to our digestion, as well as helpful to the health of our nails and our skin and our hair. Then, of course, we have the Kippers, which I've shared with you are very rich in omega-3s, as well as many other wonderful vitamins and minerals. And then we top it with something that's nutrient-rich. The Italian flat leaf parsley with some lemon juice and some shallot. It's wonderful. Plus, with using the olive oil, we've added another layer of good fats. So just an overall wonderful combination of nutrient-rich and nutrient-dense foods to provide for a full traditional foods meal, one that's complete in everything that we need. Well, let's give this a taste and I'll tell you how it came out. But I want to mention that no matter where you are on your traditional foods journey, definitely download my Essential Traditional Foods Four Corners Pantry List. And I'll have the link in the description below as well as in the pinned comment. That's going to be very helpful to you. It's 36 pages long and it's free to download. And it shows you all of the foods that you want to think about considering having stocked in your traditional foods pantry, which includes your working pantry, what you access every day, your fridge, your freezer, as well as your extended pantry, or what we nickname the prepper pantry. And I don't leave you just high and dry with a list. I have links to show you how to use all of those foods in different recipes, how to create meals with them, and so on and so forth, plus a lot of other additional information about traditional foods. I spent a lot of time putting that together, so I think that you'll find it very helpful. Alrighty, now enough talking, right? Let's eat. This is so good. And I know that if you're new to Kippers and you saw me open that can, you were like, oh dear, I don't know about this. You've got to try it. It's so delicious. Trust me, try it and let me know what you think. And so you see, that's so easy to prepare, and trust me, you're going to really enjoy it. And I just wanted to take a minute to talk about mackerel. This is also very tasty, and if you like herring, I think you will definitely like mackerel. And the nice thing about mackerel is, again, canned fish, very easy to buy, very affordable, and it often has, it'll often come with different flavor options. This one has jalapeno, it's a little spicy. This one has lemon, I love this. This one has kind of a Mediterranean style, as it says on the can. And again, this is the King Oscar brand. You should be able to find this at many grocery stores. This has got some sweet red bell pepper and some olives. So a lot of wonderful options. And you can use this the same way you use Kippers. And I think if you like Kippers, you're going to like mackerel. And you may even want to start with mackerel and then move to Kippers. Either or, but they're both very easy to prepare and they're very tasty. And it's nice because with mackerel, you also have the omega-3s, you also have selenium. And the nice thing also about canned fish is these fish are rich in iodine, which is also a good nutrient that sometimes people can feel a little deficient in if they've moved away from using iodized salt and are using more of the sea salt options. So that's something to think about as well. Also too, mackerel is rich in magnesium. And that's nice, again, when you're trying a lot of different canned fish, and maybe you've graduated up to eating the sardines with the skin and the bones, and you're getting the calcium. You can now get the magnesium from your mackerel. And calcium and magnesium really work together hand in hand in our bodies to give us strong bones. Now, I don't want to leave out anchovies and canned salmon, so let's take a minute to talk about these. I love anchovies. I can eat them straight out of the can. But if this is something that's either new to you or you find they're a little salty, there are so many recipes out there that use anchovies maybe in place of salt. I love them right topped on a Caesar salad. Just take them out of the can and put them right on top of the Caesar salad. But if you're making a homemade Caesar salad dressing, puree an anchovy or two into your dressing. Also, there's a very popular Italian recipe that you can make with spaghetti, where you take your saucepan, your frying pan, whatever you've got, and you take a little olive oil and maybe put in 2 anchovies. They're just going to completely disintegrate into the oil, and you can add a little black pepper if you want. You can add some red chili flakes, whatever you like, and then you're going to toss your cooked pasta in that, and it's scrumptious. And nobody's going to taste the anchovies. It's just going to have kind of a nice salty flavor to it. So that's a good way to get anchovies into your diet. Now, let's talk about canned salmon. This, I just feel, is one of the best buys in town. Because now this, what I've got here, is wild caught, and most of the canned salmon is wild caught. And it's often when they're catching the salmon, say these wild-caught salmons may be up in Alaska, and they're preparing them for shipping and so on and so forth, and they're cutting them up. Sometimes they may have, you know, a little tail meat or little scraps here and there. In many ways, you know, it's kind of what my mom used to call it chum. It's kind of like little bits and bobs, so to speak, of the salmon when it's being processed. But that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. It's salmon. But it may not make the cut, so to speak, you know, to make a beautiful fillet. And that's often what you're getting in here. So you're getting good quality. And I love it when the bones and the skin are included. Because again, the bones have calcium, the skin brings nutrients. I often say to the table. And so this can of salmon was only $3.99. It's wild caught, and it's Alaskan pink salmon. Now, if you can find Alaskan sockeye salmon in the can, it'll be a little more expensive, but the sockeye is even more nutritious than this, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, going forward, what I want to share with you is one of my all-time favorite recipes for how to use canned salmon to make salmon patties that really taste good. They don't, it doesn't, you know, a lot of people, these gourmet places will, like maybe a gourmet restaurant or a gourmet chef will show how to use fresh salmon to make salmon patties, and I'm sure they're scrumptious. But I always feel that when it comes to fresh salmon, if you've got it, and, you know, and it's wild caught and whatnot, it's sometimes just nice to have it as a fillet and enjoy it like that. But when you want to make something where you're making a casserole or you're making patties, canned salmon is perfect. And it doesn't taste to me like, you know, it's from the can or anything. It's just scrumptious. It's delicious. And so that's what I want to show you today, how to take this canned salmon and make some wonderful salmon patties that you're absolutely going to love. And then for our Fish Friday Marathon, I want to move into showing you a number of other fish recipes that I really like making. A couple of different fish stews where you can just use inexpensive pieces of white fish. I will often buy them, you know, again, it's not, I don't know if chum is the right word to use, but they're just little, again, bits and bobs of white fish that are packed up and sold at a very reasonable rate, perfect for making any kind of fish stew. And then I also show you how to cook a nice, if you do get a nice fillet of salmon, how to cook that with vegetables in your oven. It's a one-pan, sheet pan dish. It's so easy. It's a lovely Friday night meal, but it's also perfect if you're having friends over. It makes a wonderful presentation. And finally, in this Fish Friday Marathon, this wouldn't be complete if we didn't make some kind of fish bone broth, or what's known in French as like a fish fumet. Fish bone broth can be made in 45 minutes. It is a dream come true. It's iodine rich, it's collagen rich, and best of all you're using is the carcass of a fish. Now, if you can get the tail and the head included, all the better. And I'm going to give you a little tip. I went to the fishmonger and at a fancy store. It was the Whole Foods, but I've also done this at my local grocery store as well. And the price is always about the same. But I'm going to tell you how reasonable this was to make such a nutritious broth. So I saw the whole fish, and I said to the fishmonger, I'd like, I was offering to buy the whole fish because I was thinking, oh, I could do a lot with that. I would fillet it, I would cook it, I would get a number of meals out of it. So it was worth it to me to be willing to buy the whole fish. He had, it was intact. It was just a white fish. I can't remember exactly what variety, but just a white fish, which that's a tip I want to share with you. When making fish fumet, you really do want to stick with your more mild, neutral fishes like the white fishes. The salmon doesn't work as well for making a fish fumet because of the higher fat content that is in any scraps of fish that are left on the carcass. So really your inexpensive white fishes are perfect for this. And so I said to him, he said to me, oh, you want to buy the whole fish, the head and everything, And I said, oh yeah, and even I know how to, if I haven't done this in years, but I can, if it's given to me whole, I can cut down the underbelly, remove, the various innards and whatnot. So he said, you want to buy the whole fish? What are you making? I said, oh, well, I'll cut it up at home and use it for different recipes. But really what I want is the carcass along with the head and the tail because I want to make a fish fumet. So he said, if you don't need the whole fish and you give me a few minutes, I will go back and fillet the fish to sell the fillets to my other customers, and I will give you the carcass with the head and the tail intact and then all the bones. And how about if I mark it for $2? Can you imagine? $2. So never be afraid to talk to your fishmonger to see if he's filleting various fish and may have a carcass or two to sell to you. That I find is wonderful. And so in these recipes that I'm sharing with you, I show you how to make this fish fumet. Very easy, 45 minutes, you're gonna love it. It makes a wonderful broth for making different types of fish stews, which I share here with you, which I'm sharing here with you today. And so definitely take advantage of talking to your fishmonger, and if you fish, all the better. I mean, it really makes the job easy. And all of these recipes will be linked in the description underneath this video. So you'll have everything, you'll have blog posts, you'll have recipes, you'll have all the information you need to make your Fish Friday perfect. Today I want to share with you how to make salmon patties. This is a quick and easy salmon cakes recipe using canned salmon and perfect for any weeknight meal. Keeping a variety of canned fish in your pantry is always a good idea, but canned salmon is especially nice. It's very versatile and it's very nutritious. You can make a dip with it, you can top salads with it, but my favorite way to prepare it is to make some delicious salmon patties. Now today, canned salmon can come in all different size cans, from as small as 5 ounces to the large can, which is about 14.75 ounces. So for this recipe, which is very forgiving, so don't worry about being exact, you're going to want something that's in the range of somewhere from 13 ounces or so up to about 15 ounces or so. So that will help you decide how many cans of salmon you're going to need. What I've got here are 2 7.5 ounce cans, so I'm going to have a total of 15 ounces of canned salmon. Well, I opened my first can of salmon and I've taken a picture and I'll overlay it so that you can see, but all that's in here is salmon and sea salt. And this is a wild caught salmon. And there is some oil sort of floating on the top. That's just what has naturally come out of the salmon, which is a fatty fish. It's very high in omega-3s that scientists tell us are very good for our health. But what I wanted to mention is that I buy the canned salmon that does contain the bones and the skin. You can eat the salmon bones. They'll just crush right in your hand. They're very soft. And the skin also contains a lot of nutrition. So I like to get my money's worth, so to speak, and buy the canned salmon that does contain that. However, skinless, boneless canned salmon is sold, and you can definitely use that in this recipe as well. Now, if you do buy the canned salmon with the skin and the bones intact, when you open the can, you're going to see the skin is right there, and the bones basically are just going to be able to be crushed very easily in your hands. And I'll overlay a picture so that you can see what I'm talking about, because some people worry, oh no, the bones, I might choke. No, they basically will just fall apart in your hands. Now I've got that second can in here, and I'm just breaking this up, just chunking it relatively gently into nice pieces. And as you'll see, I do add in all that liquid. I do not drain my salmon. You can, but I think there's nutrition in that, so I don't want to drain off that oil. Now we will be using 2/3 cup of breadcrumbs, and I find that works very well with the liquid that is in the can. If you decide to drain your canned salmon and not include the liquid, then you probably can cut back a little bit on the breadcrumbs, maybe take out just a few tablespoons. That's 2/3 cup. But don't worry about writing any of this down, because I'll have the printable recipe over on my website, same name as my channel here, Mary's Nest, and there'll be a link in the description underneath this video that'll take you right over to that recipe where you can print it out. And I'll include all these little variances, if you drain the liquid, if you don't, and about how much breadcrumbs and whatnot you should add. Well, I've chunked up my salmon here. You're not trying to make it into any kind of mush or anything. Just break it up with a fork. I'll overlay a picture so that you can see this up close. But now what we're going to do is we're going to sprinkle the breadcrumbs on top. As I said, I've got 2/3 cup of breadcrumbs here. These are seasoned breadcrumbs. I like to use seasoned breadcrumbs. You can use plain breadcrumbs. You can use panko breadcrumbs, whatever you have. And you can even use your homemade breadcrumbs, which I like to use. And I made a video for that. It's very easy to do. You're basically whirling stale bread in a food processor or just mashing it up. But I'll link to that in the iCards. But in any event, if you want to add more than 2/3 cup, you can. You can add up to a cup of breadcrumbs in here, which can extend this meal and allow you to make a little extra in terms of the patty size when we go to make these. And that can help extend your food budget a little bit. And just adding that extra 1/3 cup of breadcrumbs really doesn't make these bready. It's going to be fine. So if you want to extend it, you definitely can. Next, what I've got here are 2 tablespoons of chopped green onions. You can use any kind of onion you have on hand. I just happen to have some green onions, so that's what I'm going to go with. You can use white onion, red onion. You can even use shallots if you have those. I like the green onions, I like to use the green onions when I have them because they add a nice little punch of color against the color of the salmon. So we'll get those green onions in, and then next, also for a little punch of color and as well as flavor, the green onions add nice flavor, I've got a little flat leaf Italian parsley here. And you really can use anything you like. If you're a fan of cilantro, you could add some cilantro in here. Any type of herb would work well. The only one that I would probably not add, or if I did add, I'd add a lot less, would be rosemary, only because it has a very strong flavor. I love rosemary, but you have to, you kind of got to scale that back. But I've got 2 tablespoons of the chopped flat leaf Italian parsley. Now, these are both fresh. If you're using dried, you'll just want to cut that in half. Next, I've got a 1/4 cup of mayonnaise. And you can use any mayonnaise you like, store-bought or homemade. And if you want to make homemade, I have a video where I show you how to do that just with a stick blender. It's very easy. I like that. You don't have to drag out the food processor. That always becomes rather a bit of an ordeal. But at any event, just a 1/4 cup of mayo. And then this is just a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce. I like to add the Worcestershire sauce. If you like a little spicy punch, you could add a little Tabasco. But I find the Worcestershire sauce just gives it a nice little flavor. Then I'm spilling a little bit of my salt, but what you want to use here is 1 teaspoon of salt. And this is just a fine ground sea salt, but use whatever you have on hand. And next, you just want to add 2 eggs. These were just 2 large eggs, but again, it's not an exact science, so don't worry. Whatever eggs you have will work fine. And just give them a little beating, just a light beating, and then pour them right on top of everything. Next, you just want to take your fork and just start mixing this all together. And you really just want to be gentle. You kind of want to keep some of that salmon intact so that when you go to cook them up, they have nice little chunks of salmon in them. Well, this is perfect, and now we'll get ready to shape them into patties. Now, for dinner-sized salmon cakes, I'm going to be able to make 4 from this amount of canned salmon. You can double, triple this recipe, whatever you want to do. It's very easy. But if you added that extra 1/3 cup of breadcrumbs, you should be able to get 6 dinner-size portions out of this amount of canned salmon. They'll be slightly smaller than the 4 that I'm going to get out of this amount, but they'll still be dinner-sized portion, so you can extend your recipe. Now, if you want to make these small for appetizers, which are lovely, you can easily get 8 to 12 little baby salmon cakes out of this, depending on what size you want them to be. Now what I've got here is 1/3 cup of breadcrumbs, and as I said earlier, I like to use a homemade seasoned breadcrumb. I just feel that extra little pop of flavor is nice whenever I'm breading something, but you can certainly use plain as well. But I'm just going to take that 1/3 cup, and I'm just going to flatten it out on a plate like this, nothing fancy. And then over here, I've got my little bit of secret ingredient. This is just about a tablespoon or so of mayonnaise. And what I like to do is shape my salmon patties and then coat them with the mayonnaise with a brush or my hand, whatever's easiest, my clean hand, and then pat them into the breadcrumbs before we'll take them over to the stove to cook them. And the reason is, for a weeknight meal, I really don't like to go through the whole process of dipping them in flour, dipping them in egg, and then dipping in the breadcrumbs. It's a lot of plates to set up. It's a lot to do. That does come very nicely when you have the time, but I find that it can be a little elaborate for a weeknight meal. On the other hand, if I just take the salmon patty, even though they're pretty moist, and dip them in the breadcrumbs, I find it's a little uneven as to how they stick. And I find that when I put the mayonnaise coating on it, the breadcrumbs stick very well, and the mayonnaise adds a little touch of tang to the flavor of the salmon patties, and it adds a little bit of moistness, which is nice. Sometimes they can lean a little on the dry side, but I find that putting that little bit of mayo as a coating really helps ensure their moistness. Now I'm just going to take my clean hand here, and I'm just going to go down the middle here, make an indentation, and then I'm going to go the other way and make another indentation so that I've divided this into 4. Then I'm going to take my first patty, and I'm just going to shape it into a little cake, into a little patty. And so there we have our patty. Now what I'm going to do is take my fingers and just dip them in a little bit of this mayonnaise. And I'm just going to rub this all over the top. You could certainly use a pastry brush, but I find with my hands already covered with the salmon, this is just easier to do with my fingers. Then I'm just going to flip it over in my hand, and then I'm just going to take this side and gently tap around some mayonnaise. Now, ready to dip in the breadcrumbs. Boom. Then I'm just going to flip it over and get the other side. Next, once you get your patties all tossed in the breadcrumbs, what you're going to need is 2 tablespoons of some type of fat to cook them in. We're going to cook these in a frying pan on the stovetop. And I've got 2 tablespoons of ghee. It's a type of clarified butter. You could also use butter if you want, But you need to be a little careful because you don't want your salmon patties to burn. And sometimes the milk solids that are in butter can burn. But you can ameliorate that problem a little bit by doing a combination of oil and butter. And olive oil would be my choice. The other option is just using olive oil or another type of oil that you like to saute in that is appropriate for pan sauteing. Lard and tallow, in my humble opinion, are always welcome fats for cooking in my kitchen, but the fact that we're doing salmon, we may want to use a little bit of a lighter touch, like a ghee or a clarified butter or an olive oil. Next, you just want to turn your temp up to about a medium on your stovetop, and I'm using a nonstick pan. It's one of these more healthy versions of nonstick as opposed to the old-fashioned nonstick pans. But if you have a heavy bottom stainless steel pan or a heavy bottom cast iron pan, that should work as well. You just want to keep your eye on them to make sure you're not burning them or that they're sticking. But the 2 tablespoons of fat that we're using should be very helpful in preventing any sticking. So you just want to let, if you're using a solid fat, just let it melt. If you're using an oil, just allow it to come up to temp. And then we'll get ready to put our salmon patties or salmon cakes into the frying pan. Well, I put a few little breadcrumbs into the melted ghee and they sizzled, so it's time to put in our patties. So we'll do one at a time. Here we go. Now we'll get our second patty in there and continue on. Now we'll get our fourth patty in there. Perfect. Alrighty, we're going to let those cook for about 3 minutes on each side and then we'll flip them over. Well, I flipped each patty over. They browned nicely on one side, and now I'm going to let them cook another 3 minutes or so to brown on the other side, and then we'll be ready to give them a taste. And when you go to flip them, since one side is cooked and one side's not cooked yet, you have to do it a little gingerly. I'll just give you a heads up on that. But don't worry if a little piece falls off or something. You can just take your spatula and just tuck it right back in and you'll be fine. Well, these look great. So I'm just going to get them out of the pan now and onto my serving platter. I turned off my heat and we'll get ready to give these a taste. Well, I've got one on a plate here and I want to break it right down the middle so that you can see the nice chunks of salmon. These don't make like the mushy, salmon burgers or salmon patties or salmon cakes. These have nice chunks of salmon, and I'll bring you in closer so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, I really love having those little chunks of salmon throughout. I just find it's very appetizing when you cut into it. Well, let's give it a taste. Oh, it's so flavorful. It's really delicious. Today I'm sharing a recipe for an easy fish stew that includes a fish bone broth that's iodine rich, perfect for good thyroid health. Well, the list of ingredients to make this fish stew are very simple. You're going to want some chopped onion. This was 2 small chopped onions. If you have 1 large onion chopped, that's fine too. It's very flexible. You don't need to worry about being exact. And then I've just got 1 bunch of parsley that I chopped up. And then in here I've just got a little bit of seasoning, and this will adjust at the end when we taste it. But to start, I've got a teaspoon of coarse Celtic sea salt. I like the wet gray Celtic sea salt, and I've just started with a teaspoon of that. I have 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper and about 1/8 teaspoon of red pepper flakes. That's just for a little spice. If you don't want that, you can certainly leave them out. And then you're also going to want a can of chopped tomatoes. And here I've got a cup of white vermouth. Now, you can also use white wine, and if you want to just leave that out, you can, and just use some water in place of that. And then finally, well, not finally, we have 1 more ingredient, the fish, the star of the show, which we'll get to in a minute. but over here I've got 8 cups of fish bone broth. And this is my homemade fish bone broth. You can certainly use store-bought, but I highly recommend making your own. It's very easy to make, and I'll link to the video where I show you how to make fish bone broth in the iCard above, and I'll also link to it in the description below. It's very easy to make, and it's very inexpensive to make because basically you're just going to use fish bones. And the nice thing about fish bone broth is that it's very high in iodine, which is wonderful for nourishing our thyroids. And here I've got just about 2 pounds or so of halibut. You can use any white fish that you have, but what I recommend is, if you can, talk to the fishmonger at your grocery store and see if you can buy some little bits and bobs, so to speak, of white fish that maybe they've cut up that were maybe the end pieces, or when they were cutting the fillets, maybe if there was a piece that wasn't perfect. And so sometimes they have these little cut up pieces that are going to be a lot less expensive than buying a nice fillet of fish and then cutting that up to make a fish stew. And I just hate doing that. If you have a beautiful fillet, it's just nice to cook it like that. You don't really want to cut that up and make a fish stew out of it. So you really want to talk to the fishmonger and say, you know, do you have any little pieces of white fish that were left over from when they were cutting up the nice fillets? And that's perfect for making a fish stew with, and it's going to be considerably less expensive than buying the fillet. Now, as I said, this is halibut, and I actually bought this online from Vital Choice Seafood, and it's a wonderful company. I really like buying fish from them. And they sell packages of cut up pieces of fish that are basically, as I said, you know, left over from when they were cutting up nice individual pieces that they package and sell and whatnot that are more costly. But these little chunks are very inexpensive. And so I love buying these and keeping them in my freezer, and they're easy to pull out. They come pre-packaged. I defrost a package, and then I can make a fish stew. And it's much more affordable, and I just feel a lot better about it than cutting up a nice, beautiful fillet. Well, in my soup pot here, I've got a tablespoon of butter and a tablespoon of olive oil. And I'm just going to bring this up to medium heat, and I'm going to get ready to cook the onions. Well, now I've got this up to temp, so I'm going to go ahead and just add in these onions, and we're going to saute them just until they're translucent. We don't want to brown them. And while I'm sauteing these up, I'll go ahead and add in the salt and the black pepper and the red pepper flakes. Well, I've got the onions nicely sauteed, and I'm just going to add this white vermouth to deglaze the pan. Now I'm just going to bring this up to a boil and let some of that alcohol cook off. Alrighty, well, I've let some of that alcohol cook off. And now what I like to do is, at this point, I like to add the fish. And the reason is this gives the outside of the fish a chance to just saute a bit before I add in the liquid. And that lets the protein in the fish cook and not, it prevents, doing it this way prevents a sort of milky white appearance in the fish stew. So I recommend doing this, adding the fish at this point before you add the liquid. I think you'll find that just kind of quickly sauteing the fish on the outside will help prevent that sort of white milky appearance that can develop when you just add raw fish to a heated liquid. It's just a quick saute, and I'll overlay a picture so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. You're not cooking it through, you're just cooking the outside quickly. And now we're going to go ahead and add in our parsley, and then we'll get ready to add in our tomatoes and finish it off with the fish broth. In go the can of tomatoes. We'll just give everything a stir, and then we'll add in that fish bone broth. Now we'll add in this fish bone broth, and you want this to be warm. You don't want to be adding in cold liquid because then it'll take a long time to come up to a simmer, and we don't want to overcook the fish. Well, I've brought this up to a simmer. I'm just going to let it simmer for a few more minutes, and then it'll be ready. Well, I let this simmer for a few minutes, and I think it's all ready to eat. I'm just going to taste this broth to check for seasoning. Oh, that's perfect. It's delicious. You're gonna love making your own fish bone broth for using in recipes like this. It just adds such a wonderful flavor when it's homemade. Well, this fish stew looks beautiful, and I'll overlay a picture so you can get a real close-up look of it. But let's just take a little taste. I want to. The broth is wonderful. But now let's see how the fish, the tomatoes, and the parsley is. Oh, everything is cooked perfectly. This is so delicious. It comes together so quickly, and it's so nutritious. Hi, sweet friends. Welcome back to Mary's Nest. Today we're making Cioppino, a flavorful Italian fish stew that's quick and easy to prepare and perfect to serve for a family supper, but fancy enough for company. Well, let's go over the ingredients. First, in my pot here, I've got 3 tablespoons of olive oil and 3 tablespoons of butter. And then the fish that I've got here is some shrimp, some scallops, and some halibut. Now, Cioppinis are the type of recipe that every family will kind of have their own version of it. It's something that was developed in San Francisco, actually, by Italian fishermen. And they basically would use whatever they had, whatever they liked. You'll often see it with clams as well as mussels. But my family's not too fond of that. So what I'm just going to do is shrimp, scallops, and halibut. The shrimp is local from, well, relatively local to Texas from the Gulf. I've got some scallops here. And then the halibut, I actually buy online from Vital Choice. And this is not sponsored. I just like their seafood. And they sell halibut in small little pieces, so it's a lot less expensive. It's basically pieces bits and pieces, so to speak, that they have from trimming up, you know, beautiful fillets that they sell whole, individually packaged like that. But then they sell the little pieces at a much reduced rate, and that's such a good buy for when you're making something like a fish stew. Alrighty, and the rest is some chopped onion. This is about 2 onions chopped, and again, this is a very flexible recipe. I don't want to say 1 cup or 1.5 cups. Whenever I read recipes I think that are like that, I often think, well, if 1 onion is just slightly under a cup, then I have to open cut up another onion, then what am I going to do with the rest of that onion? So basically what I did here was just chop up 2 onions. They were medium sized. If you have a large one, then 1. If they're small, 3, you know, whatever. It's very flexible. And then here I've got 2 cups of tomatoes. You can use, you know, something that you may have home canned, or something that you buy in the can. I think the cans run about 15 ounces, so it'd be slightly under 2 cups, but again, very flexible. And it's just plain chopped tomatoes. And then I've got 2 teaspoons here. Again, a little estimation. I use a tube, so I just kind of squeeze it out. And I've got 2 teaspoons of tomato paste. And then I've got some fresh chopped parsley. It's just a bunch of parsley. I just remove the long hard stems on the bottom and then just chop the rest up. Even I don't destem it or anything like that. I just chop it all up. And then here I've got about a 1/2 cup of white vermouth. You could use white wine, or you could just use water. It's just to deglaze the pan after we cook up the onions. And then in here and the garlic, this is what I've got here, 3 cloves of garlic that are just smashed in my mortar and pestle. And then here I've got 2 bay leaves. I've got a little bit of Italian red pepper. It's a little spicy. It's only about 1/8 of a teaspoon. You can leave it out. My husband likes a little spice, so I always add that in. And then I've got a teaspoon of salt. And then again, you'll taste it at the end, and you may want to add extra salt to taste. But we'll start with a teaspoon of salt. And then I have about a 1/2 teaspoon of cracked black pepper, and then this is about a teaspoon of Italian seasoning. If you don't have that, that's fine, don't worry about it. If you've got oregano, that works well too. I like this Italian seasoning blend, so I tend to throw that in. And then finally is the fish stock, and it's about 4 cups of fish stock. If you don't have fish stock, don't worry about it. What you can do is, if you're using shrimp, you can, that's, you know, with the shell on, and I recommend that you buy it with the shell on. After you clean it up, you can just take the shrimp shells, put them in some water, add, you know, an onion, a carrot, a celery, you know, like you were making some kind of broth. And then you can just make your own little sort of shrimp broth to fill in, you know, for your fish broth. And that's easy to do. And boil them up, you know, with the aromatics, throw in a bay leaf, some peppercorns, whatever you have, and put in, you know, maybe about 6 cups of water if you're hoping, you know, at the end to have about 4 cups of fish stock. And well, about 45 minutes later, you'll have a lovely flavorful broth. Now, if you're using shrimp with the shell on it, the first thing you'll want to do is just clean up the shrimp. And this is a relatively easy thing to do if you have this little tool. And you may find this in the kitchen section of your grocery store or around where the fishmonger is in the grocery store. I found this particular one. This is my second one. I broke one, actually. They're plastic and they're pretty hard. I don't really remember how I broke it, but these are sold right at my fishmonger's counter. Now what I'm going to do is you just take this tool. I'm going to show you this way first and then I'll bring you in closer. You just take this tool and you run it down the back of the shrimp here. Now for this fish stew, I am going to leave the tails on the shrimp. I do like to have a little bit of flavor that some of the shrimp shell adds, and so you just go like that and then you're just going to break it. And then you're going to peel it right off like that. Get every last bit and just clean out the back there and you're all set. It's very easy to do. Having that tool makes it so easy, and then you have your clean shrimp. Well, I just wanted to bring you in closer so you could see exactly how this tool works. So as I said, it's a hard plastic and you just put it at the top of the shrimp here and you just work it through up to where you want. If you want, you can go right through to the end and take the tail off. But as I said, I'm going to leave a little bit of that tail on. So I'm going to break it out through there. And then you just continue pushing it like that. And it's nice. It comes right off. It cracks it right open like that. And then I just pull the shell off. Pull it from the bottom, get everything out. And then I just clean out the back a little. Pull off whatever shell I don't want left. Pull off that little bit. And then I'm all set with my nice clean shrimp. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish cleaning up all these shrimp. I'm going to save these shells for later and make a nice shrimp broth with them to use for a shrimp bisque. But for now I'll go ahead and I'll clean all these up and then we'll continue with the recipe. Well, I cleaned up all the shrimp, so that's all set, and I've turned my heat on over here. The butter is melted down, and that's mixed with the olive oil, and now I'm going to get ready to add the ingredients, and I'll bring you in closer so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is put in my chopped onion, and I'm just going to swirl that all around in the butter and olive oil and start getting that to where it's translucent. You don't need to brown it. We're just going to get it translucent. And once we get to that point, I'll add the garlic and cook it for another minute or two, and then we'll continue. Alrighty, well, I sauteed the onions for a few minutes, and now I'm going to add in the garlic. And they look wonderful. This is the garlic, 3 garlic cloves that I pulverized in the mortar and pestle. Alrighty, here we go. We're just going to saute this garlic up for another minute or two, and then we'll get ready to add the white vermouth. Alrighty, well, the onions and the garlic have sauteed for another few minutes, and now I'm going to add the white vermouth. I'll stir this around and let a bit of the alcohol cook off, and then we'll get ready to proceed with the other ingredients. Alrighty, I let all that simmer for a few minutes, and now I'm going to go ahead and add in the bay leaves and the various other spices that we had. We've got the red pepper flakes, the salt, the pepper, and the Italian seasoning. And it all goes. And I'll stir that around. And then we'll give that a second or two to get all incorporated, and then we'll get ready to add the rest of the ingredients. Okay, now I'm going to add the tomatoes, the chopped tomatoes, and the tomato paste. And I'm just going to stir that around to incorporate. Now I'm going to add in most of the parsley. I'm going to leave a little tiny bit behind that I'll use for garnish at the end, maybe just about a tablespoon or so. There we go, that's good. And I'm going to leave this little bit left for, as I said, the garnish. And now I'm just going to mix all of this in and incorporate the parsley. Got a lot on my hand. Okay, that's incorporated beautifully. And now I'm going to add the fish stock. And I'm just going to stir this around, and I'm going to bring this up to a boil. And then once it comes up to a boil, I'm going to turn it down to low, and I'm going to let it simmer for 10 minutes. Well, I had brought this up to a boil, then I turned it down to low, the lowest setting possible, put the lid on to let it simmer for about 10 or 15 minutes. Now I've turned the heat back up, and I'm going to start putting in the fish. I'm going to put the fish in first, because it'll just take a minute or two more than the shrimp and scallops will take. So I'm just going to get that fish in. It's halibut, and, you know, as I had mentioned earlier, it's a nice meaty fish. Oh, this fellow's getting away. I'm just going to put that in there, get that stirred around, and we'll just give that a minute or two, and then after that I'll add the shrimp and scallops. Well, I've got the halibut in there, and that's been in a minute or two, and now I'm going to put in the shrimp. Here we go. Beautiful. It's all nice and cleaned. Just get that in there. I actually had one fella, I gotta devein him or remove his shell. And now I'm gonna go put the scallops in. This is just gonna be delicious. You know, and as I said, if you like mussels and clams, you can certainly add those. Or if you want to leave out the shellfish completely, you can just use the halibut or other white fish. You could do it with a cod, anything like that. Alrighty, I'm just going to tuck those in there, and this just needs about maybe 3 minutes, and then it's soup time, stew time. Well, this simmered for about another 3 minutes just to make sure that the shrimp and the scallops cooked, and it just looks glorious. I'm just going to plate some up here. My husband has been incredibly patient, waiting to enjoy some of this. But get the scallops, and then let me get some of the halibut. Oh, it's just beautiful. Look at this. And the broth. I took a little taste of the broth just to make sure the seasoning was correct, and it was perfect. It really didn't need anything else. Let me just put another scoop in there. I'll let that cool a bit, and we'll take another taste. Well, I've got a piece of the halibut and a little bit of the broth on the spoon. When you get ready to serve this, you can take some of the fresh parsley and sprinkle it on top. It gives it a nice little color, but I'm just going to give this a little taste. We'll see how it is. That's delicious. That is really good. The broth is wonderful with the onions and the garlic, the parsley. The halibut is cooked perfectly. The shrimp looks like it's cooked perfectly. The scallops. I mean, it's just a feast. I think that you will really enjoy this. As you see, it's very easy to make. It comes together very quickly, and it's definitely fancy enough to serve to company. Hi, sweet friends. Today I want to share with you how to make the most of your sheet pan suppers. If you've ever struggled with your sheet pan suppers, getting things to brown up nicely and to cook evenly, I've got some tips to share with you today that I think is going to make your life a lot easier and your sheet pan suppers a lot more successful. When it comes to making sheet pan suppers, the first thing you're going to need is a sheet pan. Some people know it also as a jelly roll pan. I've got mine lined in aluminum foil for easy cleanup, but I know many of us are uncomfortable about cooking on aluminum, specifically in this case aluminum foil, but there's a quick fix. You can take a piece of parchment paper and put that right on top of your sheet pan. That'll protect your food from the aluminum foil, but at the same time make cleanup really easy. I do want to share one tip though. If you cook directly on aluminum foil, you may find that your food browns a little better than if you just cook it directly on parchment paper. Now, another quick fix, so to speak, to that problem is if you have a sheet pan that's made of stainless steel, and they are made of stainless steel in addition to aluminum, you can cook directly on your stainless steel sheet pan. The only difference is going to be cleanup's not going to be as easy. Next, whenever you're making a sheet pan supper, you always want to include some type of fat. By drizzling your food with some type of fat, it will help not only with flavor, but it'll also help with browning. And that's especially important if you decide to cook directly on parchment paper. A great fat to use for your sheet pan suppers is olive oil. I've got some Texas olive oil here, and we are going to make a sheet pan supper, which I'll share with you in a minute. Also, olive oil and butter together work really well, and you don't need to worry about melting the butter in advance. You can just dollop it around your food, and then halfway through cooking, you can toss things around a bit and then finish cooking. Another type of fat that works really well is clarified butter or ghee. They're both derived from butter, they just have the milk solids removed. Clarified butter has a more simple flavor, where ghee has a little bit more of a nice toasted flavor. The next important thing to keep in mind when you're making a sheet pan supper is what protein you're cooking and what vegetables will cook at the same rate as the protein. If you're cooking chicken, carrots, potatoes, turnips, root vegetables like that work very well and will cook at the same rate your chicken will take to cook. If you're cooking beef or pork in a sheet pan supper, the vegetables that work really well and will cook at a very similar rate to those types of meats are beets and Brussels sprouts and cauliflower. Today we're going to make baked salmon, and the type of vegetables that work really well with fish are summer squash and zucchini. I also have some yellow zucchini here, which I thought would be fun to add. Cherry tomatoes work really well. Foods like broccolini work great. Asparagus work great. All of those will cook at a similar rate of your fish, as your fish. Now I'll go ahead and cook this on parchment paper so you can see how this turns out. This full recipe is in my cookbook, the Modern Pioneer Cookbook, and if you're following along, it's on page 292. Now in that particular recipe, I do use ghee so you can see and get instructions for how I dollop the ghee on the fish and the veggies, but today I'm going to go ahead and use some olive oil. So all I'm going to do is just put a little bit of olive oil on my parchment paper. Now I've got my side of salmon right here on my sheet pan, and if you're able to get a side of salmon from your fishmonger, all the better, because often you can get a better buy when you buy the whole piece like this as opposed to buying individual pieces or individually wrapped pieces. Buying a whole piece of salmon often is less per pound, so that's just a little tip I wanted to share with you. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this aside and we'll cut up our veggies. Now I'm going to go ahead and save my scraps for my scrap bag for when I make bone broth or soup, whatever the case may be. And all I'm going to do is just cut my zucchini and my summer squash into bite-sized pieces. Now I'm just going to scatter this all around my fish, and then I'll go ahead and continue cutting up the rest of the zucchinis and the summer squash. So I've got plenty of squash on this sheet pan. So now I'm just going to go ahead and just scatter my tomatoes all around. You don't have to worry about cutting them or smashing them or anything. They're going to burst under the heat of the oven, and they'll be gorgeous when this salmon is done. Now I'm going to take some olive oil and just drizzle it across the veggies and across the salmon, and then I'm going to do a little bit of seasoning. Now, I'm not going fancy here, but you can always go as fancy or as simple as you want. I'm just going to use some sea salt, and then I'm going to use some black pepper, some spicy red pepper flakes, and another little ingredient which I'll share with you. Now, I won't do that noise too long for you on the camera, but I just want to say that if you ever have if your hands are ever a little stiff or something, but you really like using sea salt, but the grinder can be a little challenging, or a pepper mill can be a little challenging, I just love these electric salt and pepper shakers. My husband gave them to me for, I think it was a birthday present, and I absolutely love them. And they're made by Zwilling. I have no relationship to the company, but I'll be sure to put a link to them below if you're interested. But they are terrific. And they're made for sea salt. Now I'm just going to put some black pepper on the fish. I also put some salt and pepper on the vegetables. Now I'm just going to put a few red pepper flakes, but I'm just going to put these on the fish. Now what I've got here is a little maple sugar. It's just about 1/8 of a cup, not a lot. And I love sprinkling this on top of the salmon. It just makes for this kind of sweet and spicy type of taste, and we just love it. You could use maple syrup if you want. You do need to be careful if you use, a lot of times, in our traditional foods kitchens, we like to use the unrefined sugar cane, the dried sugar cane. That can burn a little, so you need to be careful. But maple sugar works like a charm. And I'm wondering if coconut sugar might work well too. And I've decided to gild the lily a bit, and I'm going to dot this salmon as well as the veggies with a little bit of butter. And this is just unsalted butter from grass-fed cows. And so it's very nice. I found it. I normally often use the Kerrygold butter from Ireland, but I found this butter. It's from New Zealand. I found it at my grocery store, and it's so yellow. I just love it. The Kerrygold is yellow too, but this butter was actually even more yellow, and it was on sale, all the better. So I picked up some of that. So I'm just going to dot these veggies. And now the next thing that we're going to do is put this in a cold oven. And then you want to set your heat. You want to put it on the middle rack in a cold oven, and then turn your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And in 20 minutes, dinner's ready. Now I want to mention that sometimes, depending on what it is you're cooking, you may want to, halfway through the cooking time, toss the veggies. You do not need to do that in the case of these very easy to cook veggies, especially when you're doing fish. But if you're doing potatoes, for example, with chicken, it can be a good idea halfway through to toss the potatoes a little bit so they become evenly browned. But the nice thing about fish and the types of veggies that cook with fish, it's really not necessary. Everything's going to cook beautifully. Well, I just took the salmon and the veggies out of the oven, and they look glorious. Now, a couple of things that I want to mention. Number one, everyone's oven is different. Now, in my oven, I start with a cold oven. I go up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and within 20 minutes, this is perfect, exactly the way I like it. But everybody's oven is different. So if at 20 minutes you feel your vegetables or your fish don't look cooked, just give it a few more minutes and you'll be fine. Also, if you use a food thermometer, I tend to like my fish, or salmon specifically, cooked to 145 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, everybody's different. Some people like it a little more sushi, as I say. Some people like it a little more well done. I like it at about 145, an internal temperature of 145. So you can always test it that way as well. If you like it a little less cooked, just go like 135. If you like it a little more cooked, go to an internal temperature of 155. Now, if you don't have a food thermometer, don't worry. If the fish is flaking nicely and when you make a little incision, it looks cooked to the level that you like, that's perfect. Well, the fish is flaking beautifully and the veggies are cooked perfectly. What I love about this is that they're cooked through and they're easy to slice through, the vegetables, but they retain some texture. They're not mushy. So let's give them a taste. Perfect. Let's get a little bit of this salmon on my fork. We'll give this a taste too. Perfect. Just a very delicious and easy meal. Today I'm going to show you how to make a fish bone broth. It can be ready in about 45 minutes. It's high in protein and it's rich in iodine, which is wonderful for supporting good thyroid health. Well, if you've been following along with me for a while now, you know we've had a lot of fun making beef bone broths and chicken bone broths, and now I want to share with you how to make fish bone broth, which is wonderfully delicious and nutritious and can be made in about 45 minutes. And fish bone broth has some wonderful properties because not only is it rich in protein, it's rich in iodine. And iodine is wonderful for nourishing our thyroid. And fish bone broth is very tasty, so you can drink it just warm out of a mug, or you can use it as a base for a clam chowder. It's wonderful for that, or any type of fish chowder, or any type of fish soup. It's the perfect base. So it gives wonderful flavor, plus high protein nutrition, plus the iodine. So fish bone broth is a wonderful bone broth to have in your culinary repertoire. Now the first thing you want to do is get out a nice big stock pot because we're going to make fish bone broth on the stove top. You don't need a slow cooker, you don't need anything fancy, just a nice big pot and your stove top. And all you want to do is put a little bit of fat, some type of fat that you like cooking with. I've got ghee in here, about a tablespoon worth. You can use butter, you can use coconut oil, olive oil, anything that you like. Basically, we're just putting a little bit of fat in there just to help saute the vegetables and prevent burning. So you want to set your burner just onto a medium heat and let the fat that you're using melt down. And you're going to want to have about 2 stalks of celery chopped, and you can have all the greens and whatnot. And if you've got vegetable scraps from celery and onion skins and carrot scraps, you can use that too. And you just want the equivalent of about 2 chopped celery stalks, 2 carrots. They're not peeled, they're just chopped. And here I've got 3 onions. My onions were a little small. You could just use 2 onions if they're big. Again, just what I've done is I've sliced them in like this, just into little coin shapes, because we're just going to kind of make a bed that we're going to put the fish bones on top of. And so I haven't quartered them the way I do normally when I'm making a beef bone broth or a chicken bone broth. And I've got my onions were a little small, so I've got about 3 onions here. Then I've just got, a little small handful of peppercorns. This is not an exact science, so don't worry. You've got 4 onions, 3 onions, 3 celery stalks, 3 carrots, 2 carrots. It's very, very flexible. And then, of course, my signature 1 bay leaf. Well, my ghee is melted, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and put all of my onions and my carrots and my celery and the peppercorns and the bay leaves into this stock pot, and we're just going to saute these for no more than 5 minutes, just to start releasing some of the flavor. But we don't want to get any color. We don't want to get any color on the onions or any of the vegetables at all. Now while that's simmering, and we're just going to let those vegetables simmer for about 5 minutes, go ahead and fill another stock pot with water, bring it up to a boil, and then turn it off and just keep it covered so that you have some nice hot water ready. And I'll show you what we're going to do with that. And the reason that we're going to need this is when we get ready to add the water to make the fish bone broth, we want to add hot water. We don't want to add cold water. Now I've got about 5 pounds of fish bones here. Now you may be wondering, where do you get fish bones? What you're going to want to do is go to your fishmonger at the fish counter at your grocery store or your specialty grocery store and ask them, do they sell fish bones? And chances are they will have some in the back. They're not probably going to have them on the front counter, but they might have them in the back. And they're usually very reasonable. I paid less than $10 for all of this. And what I did was I went to the Whole Foods grocery store and I said to the fishmonger, do you have any fish bones? And he said, yes, I have them in the back. And then he went in the back and got them for me. And this was halibut. Now, I also want, these are fish bones from, this over here is fish bones from halibut. And I also wanted some fish heads. And unfortunately, they didn't have any, but they were selling some whole fish. They had red snapper. And I asked the fishmonger, well, could I buy the whole fish and then you can fillet it for me? And he was exceptionally nice and said, oh, I'll fillet it and I'll just sell the fillet separately to someone else if you don't want them. And I'll just sell you the fish head with the bones. And that's what he did. And again, this was, as I said, altogether, this was about $10. And this cost next to nothing. The reason is you want to find a fish head is because the fish heads are what are going to bring a lot of gelatin to your final product, your final fish bone broth. And as you know, I always like to try to make my bone broth, whatever type I'm making, very gelatinous, because it's that gelatin that we're looking for to nourish our gut. Now, something that I want to bring to your attention about the fish head is that you want to make sure that the gill is removed. And that looks like this is removed, so I don't have it to show you, but the piece would be right here, and it would be kind of a very deep color, deeper than the color of the flesh or the outside of the fish. And the fishmonger at Whole Foods removed that for me. And the reason you want to remove the gill is because it can put a bit of an off flavor into your fish bone broth, and you wouldn't want that. Now, the next step we're going to take in making our fish bone broth is that we want to sweat our bones. It's sort of the equivalent of when we are roasting our beef bones or our chicken bones. But instead of roasting them in the oven, we're going to sweat them right in our stock pot. And allowing for them to sweat for about 10 or 15 minutes allows the protein, the collagen, to start being released from the bones. So that's what I mean by sweating, to just basically we're steaming them, we're putting them on top of this layer of vegetables, our sort of mirepoix, our onions, our carrots, our celery, and we're just going to put them on there. And then we're going to add a little, I'm going to add white vermouth. You could also add any kind of dry white wine. This is about ½ a cup is all you're going to need for the 5 pounds of fish bones. Or I know there are some of you have told me that you don't like to use a wine, you don't like to use a fortified wine. So yes, you could use vinegar, but what I would recommend is if using your apple cider vinegar and using only about a tablespoon and diluting that in a ½ a cup of water, because you are going to need some liquid in here, but a ½ a cup of vinegar would be way too strong and would give a very off-putting taste to your final product, especially since this is only going to take about 45 minutes to make. So that's really not going to give enough time to have that strong vinegar flavor evaporate. Alrighty, well, let's get started with this. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start taking our bones and we're going to start putting them right on top of those vegetables. And then we're going to go ahead and add in the white vermouth, and then we're going to put the lid on and let them simmer or sweat for about 10-15 minutes. And as I'm adding these bones in, I just want to show you that there's still some wonderful meat on here. And this was not going to be discarded. As I said, we're just going to simmer this for a relatively short period of time and then pull off all this fish and use it to make a wonderful soup or a chowder. And now the piece de resistance, the fish head. Now I'm going to go ahead and add in my white vermouth. And then I'm going to remove my spoon. I'm going to put the cover on, and I'm just going to let those bones sweat for about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll check them, and I'll show you the white substance that you'll start seeing to leach out of the bones. Well, these bones have been sweating for about 7 minutes or so, and I just wanted to pull one out to show you what I'm talking about as the collagen starts to become the protein, which is in this case collagen, is starting to be released from the bones. And it's like a white substance. I took a picture and I'll overlay it so hopefully you can see what I'm talking about. But that's what you're looking for. You're going to see the bones starting to release some of their collagen, and it'll be sort of like a white, sort of very loose, little mushy, how to describe it, but look for it in the picture that I overlay. And what's nice about making fish bone broth is that you're getting the collagen that's being released from these bones, which is one type of protein, and then you're also getting the protein that is going to be released from the little bits of meat that have been left on the bone, and that's a different type of protein. And as I've explained, in videos where I talk about making beef bone broth, you have the protein that comes from the muscle meat, and then you have the protein that comes from the bones. What comes from the bones is collagen, and then what comes from the muscle meat is a different type of protein. But having the wonderful thing about bone broth is that it takes into consideration having a nice mix of proteins. You get some protein from the muscle meat and some protein from the bones as well, the collagen protein. Well, I've had my fish bone sweating here for about 10 minutes, and now I'm going to get ready to cover everything with the hot water. As you may recall, back in the beginning when we started this process, I told you to fill another stock pot with water and bring it up to a boil and then turn it off and just put a lid on to keep it warm. And the reason that we do that is we don't want to add cold water to the bone broth, to the fish bone broth, because it would take a long time to bring that up to a boil. And you don't want to overcook fish bone broth. You really just want to cook it for 30 to maybe 45 minutes, no longer than that. Because if you cook it longer than that, it can start to take on a little bit of an off flavor. So you want to add nice hot water, and that's what I've gotten here. And I'm just going to use this heat-proof measuring cup to start adding it in to cover my bones. And that's all that we want to do, is just add enough hot water to cover. And then we're going to bring this up to not quite a boil, very close to a boil, but just sort of a kind of a high simmer. And at that point, we're going to skim the foam off that comes up to the top. But we really don't want to bring this up to a rolling boil. Just kind of a little bit of a high simmer. And the reason is, again, fish bone broth is a very delicate bone broth. And if we bring it up to a hard rolling boil and then turn it down to low the way we do with the beef bone broth, it's almost just a little too much for it. And it can also create a very cloudy fish bone broth. And we kind of want to avoid that. We want to make it look as appetizing as possible. Well, I've got just enough water in here to cover, and I'll put in a photo and overlay it so you can see what I'm talking about. But basically, all you want to do is just cover the fish. No more water than that is necessary. Now, we're going to bring this up to a boil, and because we used hot water, it's already starting to show some bubbles. And I'll show you, and when I say bring it up to a boil, as I said, more of a high simmer. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about when it gets to that point. Alrighty, well, I've brought this up to that high simmer that I'm talking about, and I'll overlay a picture or a video so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And now what we want to do is we just want to go over this, and we want to start scooping off any of this foam here that comes to the top. And we're just going to go all around very gently, trying not to take too much of the liquid with us, and just get all this foam off, because that'll help. The foam just has some impurities and whatnot, and it also, by removing this, it helps the final product have a more clear appearance. Now I've turned this down to my lowest setting, and that's what you want to do. Just turn it down to the lowest setting you have on your stovetop. And if you have a thermometer, a cooking thermometer that can be submerged into liquid, you can check it at some point to make sure that it's simmering on a very low, on your very low setting at about 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And I think that's about 82 degrees Celsius. And don't worry if you don't have a cooking thermometer to check it. What you're looking for is basically, as I've shared with you in the beef bone broth videos, you want just a bubble, intermittent bubbles, very slowly. So like bloop, 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 like that. So that's what you're going to be looking for. So turn it down to low. And if you're working with a gas burner, it'll go down to low right away. But if you're working with an electric burner, you may actually want to transfer it to a different burner and set that burner at low, because sometimes it can take the electric burner a little time to come down to temp, and you don't want it to build up to a boil. Well, I've got this turned down to my lowest setting, and now I'm going to let it simmer uncovered for about 30 minutes, but no longer than 45 minutes. Well, I've had this simmering for a little over 30 minutes, and now I've turned it off, and I'm going to start straining out all of the fish bones and fish pieces and vegetables, and I'm just going to put everything in one bowl here. Well, I've removed all the bones with the bit of fish on it and the vegetables, and now we're going to get ready to strain this. Now, the way that I like to do this is I like to take a strainer like this, or you can use a colander if you've got one of those, and then I usually put this over another stock pot, but in this case I'm just going to put it over my large measuring cup here, which is glass, so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And then I like to take the strainer and line it with a flour sack towel. You can also use cheesecloth if you want, but those of you who've been with me for a while know that I love to use these flour sack towels because I can wash them and reuse them, and I've had these for years. They hold up beautifully. Now, before I line the strainer, I just want to mention that, as you'll see, it's a small mesh, but little particles could get through this, and that's why I line it with the flour sack towel. But someone mentioned to me, and I think it was in comments, about using a chinois. And a chinois, and that's a very good idea, a chinois is a conical shaped strainer, a cone shaped strainer. And it has a very, very fine mesh to it, if that's the right terminology, than this, much, much finer. And it really does strain out a lot of very small particles, so the end product is quite clear. And I think that's an excellent idea. So if you have a chinois, it's definitely worth using to strain out your broth, your bone broths, or your stocks or your broths, whatever you may be making, and will save you the process of just using a traditional strainer and some sort of flour sack towel or cheesecloth. So if you have a chinois, that's an excellent way to go about straining all of this. Alrighty, well, let me get ready and cover this strainer with the flour sack towel. And now all we're going to do is just start to take our broth, our fish bone broth, and strain it through this lined sack, and I'll show you this this lined strainer with the flour sack towel, and then I'll show you all the little pieces that I catch, and you'll understand why I like using this. So this is everything that I'm able to strain out of it, so you can understand why I enjoy using these flour sack towels to strain the broth, the fishbone broth. And you'll see we have this lovely, lovely color. And this is already over 8 cups, and I still have a whole bunch more to strain. Now, when it comes to storing my bone broth, I like to use these half-gallon mason jars or canning jars. And I use these if I'm going to store my bone broth in the refrigerator, and I think I'm going to use it up within 2 or 3 days. So you've probably, if you've seen my beef bone broth videos, you see that I store it in these type jars because my husband and I tend to drink it for breakfast, and we usually can finish a jar like this in a couple of days. And with my chicken bone broth, I tend to store it in containers like this. These are little, I think they're called the French jelly jars, something like that, or French working glass jars. I'm not exactly sure, but it's a very thick glass, and I'll often store my chicken bone broth in here because we don't usually drink chicken bone broth. I save it for making soups, sauces, and gravies. And so this is about a 2-cup size, and I'll store 2 cups of chicken bone broth in here, and then I'll put this plastic lid on top, and then I'll store this in my freezer. And I like using these because I generally always leave plenty of headspace so that when the chicken bone broth does freeze, it has plenty of room to expand, but just in case it didn't have enough room to expand, this top will just, it just kind of pops off like that, and there's no breakage or anything like that. At least I've never had that happen to me. I've had some folks tell me that they do store their chicken bone broth in canning jars. I've never done that before, but they said they've had success using wide mouth canning jars, and again, leaving plenty of head space. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the one that's here in this glass jar, in the glass measuring cup. I'm going to store that in this glass half-gallon jar because I'm going to be using this, this much, 8 cups worth. It's a little more than 8 cups. I'm going to be using this to make a fish stew. So I'm going to go ahead and just store this right in here because I'll be using this within a day or two. I'm just going to let this cool a little, and once it's cooled, I'm going to put this plastic lid on, just a plain plastic storage lid that fits on top of these mason canning jars, and then I'll put this in my refrigerator, and it'll be ready for me when I'm ready to use it in a day or two. Now I'm going to continue to strain the rest of the fish bone broth, and I'm going to store the remainder in these French jelly jars, and I'm going to refrigerate. I'm going to freeze these so that they're ready for whenever I want to make a soup or a chowder or so on and so forth. Well, I finished straining all the broth, all the fish bone broth, and this is what I want to show you. See, this is everything that I collected in the flour sack towel, and that's why I really like to use this method. And look at all this glorious fish bone broth that we got from just a bunch of bones with a little bit of fish on them and one fish head. So for about $10, you know, a little bit more counting the vegetables, but even so, you have a half a gallon here, and then all of these jelly jars filled with bone broth as well, fish bone broth. And what's so wonderful, you can use this, so wonderful about this is that you can use this to make any kind of chowder or soup. You can use this as your base, and you can just drink this. I've got a little on the side here. We'll take a taste test because this is so good and so rich in nutrients. It's high in protein, and it also contains iodine, which is something that's nice about fish bone broth as opposed to beef and chicken bone broth. So it really nourishes your thyroid, which needs the iodine. Now I put a little bit in this glass, and I'm going to go ahead and put this in the refrigerator so we can see the consistency of the gelatinousness. I always laugh when I say that word. I don't know if it's really a word, but we'll see how gelatin the fish bone broth came. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the fridge, but before I do that, and then I'll take it out in a few minutes or so, as much time as it needs to cool, and then we'll take a look at it. I'll show you how if it came gelatinous, and I think it did. Let's take a taste of this now. Oh my goodness, I don't even have any sea salt in here, and this is so tasty. Oh, it's got such a clean, it's not fishy at all. It just has a nice, clean seafood taste. I'm gonna take another taste. Yeah, just a nice seafood taste. That's delightful. This is gonna make such a wonderful soup, and or chowder for that matter. And this is something I could really drink as a regular beverage, the same way we drink beef bone broth. This is delicious. Well, I had this in the fridge, and it looks beautifully gelatinous. That fish head really makes a difference. Oh, look at that, see? Like Jell-O. I love when bone broths come like this. There you go, look at that. Oh, glorious. I'm so pleased with this, and I'll put a close-up picture. I'll overlay a close-up picture over this so that you can see it close up. Now, if you want even more fish recipes and budget-friendly recipes, including a tuna casserole that has a biscuit topping with the easiest biscuits you'll ever make, that actually dates back to the 1930s Depression era, so you know it's budget-friendly, be sure to click on this video over here where I have a completely curated playlist for you to continue to make your Fish Friday a wonderful, delicious day. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.